Paul Winters adjusted his tie in the mirror of the department store changing room. The charcoal suit wasn't designer, but it was the most expensive one he'd ever purchased. $850 that would take 3 months to pay off on his credit card. Tonight was special. Linda's promotion to marketing director at Crestview Innovations, the culmination of years of her relentless climbing and his unwavering support. "You look handsome," the elderly attendant said, passing by. "Special occasion?" "My wife's promotion celebration," Paul replied, smoothing the lapels one final time. The suit was an extravagance on his modest income, but he wanted to look the part tonight. Linda had been hinting for years that his wardrobe was too accountant, whatever that meant. Tonight he'd show her that he could fit into her corporate world. As he drove to the Lakeside Hotel, Paul's mind drifted to the conversation they'd had last week. Linda had been reviewing her speech notes at the kitchen table, and he'd asked if she wanted him to listen to her practice. "That's sweet, but unnecessary," she'd said without looking up. "The speech is just formalities anyway, thanking Roger and the executive team. Don't forget to thank your amazing husband who kept you fed and sane through the whole process," he'd joked, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. Linda had offered a distracted smile and murmured, "Of course," before turning back to her notes. The Lakeside Hotel ballroom was already buzzing when Paul arrived. Crystal chandeliers cast a flattering glow over the crowd of marketing executives and corporate clients. He recognized a few faces from company picnics, but mostly these were Linda's colleagues, not his friends. He spotted her immediately, her blonde hair styled in an elegant updo, wearing the deep blue dress they'd splurged on last weekend. She was surrounded by a circle of admirers, laughing at something the CEO, Roger Kessler, had said. He made his way to the bar, ordered a scotch on the rocks, and waited for her to notice him. She'd been too busy to come home before the event, having gone straight from a client meeting to the hotel to prepare with her team. "Save me steps on the receiving line," she'd texted. "Just come to the main event at 8. Paul checked his watch, 8:30. He caught Linda's eye across the room and raised his glass in a small toast. She gave him the briefest nod before turning back to her conversation. "First time at one of these things?" the bartender asked, noticing Paul's slightly uncomfortable posture. "That obvious, huh?" Paul smiled ruefully. "Let me guess. Spouse of a Crestview employee?" "That's right. My wife just got promoted to marketing director." The bartender nodded. "Let me know if you need another drink. These corporate events can be brutal for the plus ones." Paul was on his second scotch when Roger Kessler tapped a knife against his champagne glass, calling for attention. The crowd quieted as he stepped to the small podium. "Tonight we celebrate not just an exceptional marketing professional, but a visionary who has transformed how Crestview connects with our clients," Kessler began. "In just 5 years with our company, Linda Winters has spearheaded campaigns that increased our market share by 23% and brought in over 30 million in new accounts." Paul felt a surge of pride. He'd been there for all of it. The late nights when she'd paced their living room, workshopping pitch ideas, the weekends spent poring over market research while he brought her coffee and offered encouragement. "Without further ado, I'm thrilled to officially announce Linda Winters as Crestview's new marketing director." The room erupted in applause as Linda stepped forward, radiant in her success. Paul clapped until his hands hurt, beaming at his wife even though she hadn't yet looked his way. "Thank you, Roger, for this incredible opportunity," Linda began, her voice steady and confident. "This promotion represents the culmination of countless hours of work and dedication, not just from me, but from an entire team of brilliant professionals." She went on to thank Roger for his mentorship, her direct supervisor Diane for her guidance, and several team members by name. She expressed gratitude to the client representatives present, to the marketing department as a whole, even to Marta, the office manager who kept everyone organized. Paul waited, smiling, for the moment when she would acknowledge him, but that moment never came. "In conclusion," Linda said, "I'm excited to lead Crestview's marketing department into a new era of innovation and growth. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate with me." Another round of applause, and then she was surrounded again by well-wishers. Paul stood frozen, his glass halfway to his lips. Had she forgotten? Linda was meticulous about speeches. She practiced them repeatedly, honing every word. The omission felt deliberate, and it stung more than he could have anticipated. He finished his drink and made his way toward her, navigating through the clusters of chatting executives. When he finally reached the edge of the circle surrounding her, he caught her eye over the shoulder of a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. For a split second, recognition flashed across Linda's face. Then, puzzlingly, something like annoyance. She quickly turned her attention back to the silver-haired man, laughing at something he said and touching his arm lightly. She had seen him and deliberately looked away. "Ouch," a voice said beside him. "That was cold." Paul turned to find a man about his age in a well-cut navy suit, watching the interaction with raised eyebrows. "You saw that?" Paul asked. "Hard to miss." The man extended his hand. "James Harrington. My wife's in accounting at Crestview." "Paul Winters. My wife's the guest of honor." James's eyebrows shot up further. "Really? That's interesting." "What do you mean?" James hesitated. "Nothing. Just office politics, you know how it is." He glanced around. "Want to grab a drink? The bar's less crowded now that the speeches are done." Paul cast one more look at Linda, who was still deliberately focused elsewhere, and nodded. "Why not?" As they waited for their drinks, James leaned against the bar. "So, accounting, right? Where at?" "Beckman and Associates. Nothing exciting, but steady work." "Nothing wrong with steady," James replied. "I'm in construction management myself. Build things that last, that's my motto." Their drinks arrived and James raised his glass. "To the spouses, the invisible support systems." Paul clinked glasses, though the toast hit uncomfortably close to home. "So," James said after taking a sip, "how long have you and Linda been married?" 6 years. Together for 10, though." James nodded. "Karen and I just hit 12 years. Met her when Crestview was still a scrappy little startup." "You've been to a lot of these events then?" Paul asked. "More than I can count." James studied him for a moment. "First time being publicly snubbed?" Paul stiffened. "I wouldn't call it." "It's okay," James cut in. "We've all been there. The corporate spouse hierarchy is brutal. But getting ignored by your own wife? That's a new one." "She's just busy," Paul said automatically, though the excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears. James gave him a knowing look. "Sure, of course." He took another sip of his drink. "You know, Karen used to do that. Get too caught up in work mode to remember I existed. We had to have a serious talk about it." "And that helped?" "Eventually, after I moved out for a month." Paul nearly choked on his scotch. "That seems extreme." James shrugged. "Sometimes it takes something extreme to get their attention. These corporate types get so focused on climbing the ladder, they forget who's holding it steady." Before Paul could respond, a commotion near the buffet table caught their attention. Linda was there with Roger Kessler and the silver-haired man, all three laughing. As Paul watched, Roger placed his hand on Linda's lower back in a gesture that seemed oddly familiar for a boss. "That's Thomas Brighton," James said, following Paul's gaze. "Heads up Brighton Media, big potential client for Crestview." "They seem friendly," Paul observed, trying to keep his tone neutral. James took another sip of his drink. "Office rumor has it that Brighton's interested in more than just Crestview's marketing services." "What's that supposed to mean?" James gave him a significant look. "Just that your wife's been having a lot of client dinners with Brighton lately, always running late, according to Karen." Paul felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "That's just business." "Probably," James agreed too readily. "But if it were my wife, I'd be asking questions." The suggestion hung in the air, poisonous and impossible to unhear. Paul was saved from responding by the arrival of a petite woman with short dark hair. "There you are," she said to James. "I've been looking everywhere." "Hi," she added, noticing Paul. "I'm Karen." "Paul," he replied. "Nice to meet you." "Paul is Linda Winters' husband," James explained, and Paul didn't miss the significant look that passed between them. "Oh!" Karen's expression shifted to something like sympathy. "It's lovely to meet you. Linda's quite something at the office." The way she said it made Paul wonder exactly what that something was. "We should get going," James said, finishing his drink. "Early start tomorrow. Paul, it was good talking with you." He pulled out a business card. "If you ever want to grab a beer or something, give me a call." After they left, Paul remained at the bar, nursing his third scotch and watching as Linda continued to work the room. Not once did she glance his way or make any attempt to include him in conversations. It was as if he had become invisible, a ghost at his own wife's celebration. An hour into the party, Paul decided to try again. He approached as Linda was momentarily standing with just Thomas Brighton, their heads bent close together. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into their small circle. "I don't mean to interrupt." Linda's smile faltered. "Thomas, have you tried the canapes? They're by that new caterer I was telling you about." Brighton took the hint. "I'll go sample them now. Linda, we'll continue our discussion later?" "Absolutely. I'm very interested in your proposal." Once Brighton was out of earshot, Paul said quietly, "Congratulations again. Your speech was great." "Thanks," Linda replied, her eyes already scanning the room for her next conversation target. "You forgot to mention something in it, though," Paul continued, unable to let it go. Linda finally focused on him. "What?" "Me," he said simply. "Your husband, the one who supported you through this entire journey." Linda's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "That was a professional speech, Paul. I was acknowledging professional contributions. So I haven't contributed to your success?" Paul felt a flare of anger he rarely allowed himself. "Who's been handling everything at home for the past 2 years while you focused on this promotion? Who stayed up with you until 2 a.m. reviewing presentations? Who rearranged his entire life to accommodate your career?" "Lower your voice," Linda hissed, plastering on a fake smile as a group passed by. Once they were out of earshot, she continued, "This isn't the place for this conversation." "When is the place, Linda? You're barely home. And when you are, you're too tired to talk about anything substantial." Linda's eyes darted over his shoulder, and her expression suddenly transformed, brightening into a welcoming smile. "Roger, I was just about to look for you. There's someone I'm dying for you to meet." And just like that, she sidestepped Paul entirely, moving to intercept the CEO, as if her husband had simply vanished into thin air. Paul stood alone, the conversation, if it could be called that, apparently over. Around him, the party continued unabated, laughter and conversation flowing as freely as the champagne. He made his way back to the bar, ordering a fourth scotch, despite knowing he should slow down. "Rough night?" the bartender asked sympathetically. "You could say that," Paul replied. "Apparently I'm invisible." As the evening progressed, Paul found himself increasingly sidelined. Later, when he approached Linda at the dessert table, she quickly excused herself to check on something with Roger. The final straw came as the event was winding down. Paul overheard a conversation between Linda and Thomas Brighton as they stood near the coat check. "The London proposal is nearly ready," Brighton was saying. "I just need to finalize a few details. Perhaps over dinner next week?" "I'd like that," Linda replied, her voice warm with promise. "The Westfield at 8? They have private dining rooms that are perfect for in-depth discussions." "It's a date," Brighton said, his hand lingering on Linda's arm longer than was professionally necessary. Neither of them noticed Paul standing just around the corner, coat already in hand. He didn't wait for Linda. He didn't say goodbye. He simply walked out to his car and drove home to their empty apartment. Sitting in the dark living room, Paul tried to make sense of what had happened. The Linda he'd witnessed tonight was almost unrecognizable, cold, dismissive, and possibly crossing professional boundaries with clients. Was this who she had always been? Or had success changed her so fundamentally in such a short time? When the door opened at 1 a.m., Paul was still sitting there, though he'd changed out of his expensive suit into a t-shirt and sweatpants. Linda flipped on the light, startling when she saw him. "You're still up," she said, not quite meeting his eyes as she set down her purse. "We need to talk about what happened tonight," Paul said, his voice steady despite the anger and hurt churning inside him. Linda sighed, kicking off her heels. "Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't wait. You treated me like a stranger tonight, Linda. Worse than a stranger. At least you acknowledged the waitstaff." "You're being dramatic," she said, moving to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. "It was a work event. A work event where you thanked literally everyone except your husband, where you deliberately avoided me all night, where you made plans for a dinner date with Thomas Brighton." Linda's head snapped up. "You were eavesdropping on me? I was standing 3 feet away. You were just too absorbed in Brighton to notice. Paul leaned forward. Is something going on between you two? That's ridiculous, Linda scoffed, but a flush crept up her neck. Thomas is a potential major client. Of course I'm going to give him special attention. Special attention, Paul repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling it now? Linda slammed her glass down on the counter. What exactly are you accusing me of? I don't know, Linda. You tell me. Because from where I was standing tonight, alone by the way, it looked like you were embarrassed to be seen with me. Like I was some inconvenient attachment you'd rather people didn't know about. That's not true, she protested, but her eyes slid away from his. I was just focused on work, on making connections that matter for my career. The casual cruelty of that statement, that connections with him didn't matter, hit Paul like a physical blow. James Harrington's wife works in your accounting department, he said quietly. Linda stiffened. You were talking to James Harrington? About me? He approached me actually. Seemed to think it was strange that my own wife was ignoring me at her promotion party. James Harrington is a gossip who's jealous that his wife hasn't advanced as quickly as I have, Linda said dismissively. You shouldn't listen to anything he says. He mentioned you've been having a lot of late dinners with Brighton. Of course I have. He represents a potential 7-figure account. Linda threw up her hands. This is exactly why I don't mix my work and personal lives. You don't understand how business relationships work in my industry? I understand plenty, Paul countered, rising from his chair. I understand that you used to call me when you were running late, that you used to talk about your clients in meetings with me, that you used to act like we were partners, not like I was some inconvenient detail you needed to manage. Linda's expression softened slightly. Look, I know I've been distracted lately. This promotion has been all-consuming, but things will settle down now, I promise. Will they? Because tonight felt like a preview of our future. Me standing alone at parties while you pretend I don't exist. Me waiting up at night while you have client dinners with men who look at you like Thomas Brighton does. Nothing is happening with Thomas, Linda insisted. And yes, I should have mentioned you in my speech. I'm sorry about that. It was an oversight, that's all. Paul studied her face, searching for the woman he'd fallen in love with. An oversight, he repeated, like forgetting to buy milk. Except you thank the office manager, Linda. You thank the catering staff. But your husband of 6 years didn't even rate a mention? Linda ran a hand through her hair, disheveling the perfect updo. What do you want me to say, Paul? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. Can we please go to bed now and talk about this tomorrow when we're both less emotional? No, Paul said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. No, we can't, because this isn't just about tonight. This is about patterns, about the fact that I've become background noise in your life, useful for keeping the apartment running and listening to your work problems, but not important enough to acknowledge publicly. That's not fair, Linda protested, but there was a flicker of guilt in her eyes that told Paul he'd hit home. Let me ask you something, he said, taking a step closer. When was the last time you asked me about my day, about my job, about anything in my life that doesn't directly relate to supporting yours? Linda opened her mouth and closed it again. The silence stretched between them, damning in its emptiness. That's what I thought, Paul said quietly. I'm going to stay at Michael's for a while. I need some space to think. You're leaving? Linda's voice rose in disbelief. Because I didn't thank you in a speech? No, I'm leaving because tonight made me realize that our marriage has become completely one-sided, and I deserve better than that. He moved past her to the bedroom, pulling out a duffel bag and methodically filling it with clothes, toiletries, and essentials. Linda followed, watching from the doorway with growing alarm. Paul, this is ridiculous. You can't just leave in the middle of the night because you're feeling underappreciated. Watch me, he replied, zipping the bag closed. What am I supposed to tell people? My husband threw a tantrum and walked out the night of my promotion? Paul shouldered his bag. Tell them whatever you want. You're good at pretending I don't exist anyway. The words landed like a slap. Linda stepped back, shock registering on her face. I'll call you when I've had some time to think, Paul said, moving past her toward the door. Paul, wait! Linda grabbed his arm. Please don't do this. Not tonight. This should be a celebration, not whatever this is becoming. That's the problem, Linda. It's always about what you want, What you need, what's convenient for you. He gently removed her hand. For once, I'm putting myself first. With that, he walked out, closing the door firmly behind him. Paul's brother Michael lived in a small house 30 minutes outside the city. Despite the late hour, he answered the door on the second knock, immediately alert when he saw Paul's expression. "What happened?" he asked, ushering Paul inside. "My marriage might be over," Paul said, the words strange and hollow in his mouth. Michael didn't press for details, just showed him to the guest room and offered him a beer, which Paul gratefully accepted. They sat in Michael's kitchen until 3 a.m., Paul recounting the events of the evening, while Michael listened with increasing outrage. She seriously pretended not to see you? Her own husband? Multiple times, Paul confirmed, and then got annoyed when I called her on it. Michael shook his head. That's messed up. And this Brighton guy? You think something's going on there? I don't know. Maybe not yet, but the potential is there. Paul took a long pull of his beer. The thing is, even if there's nothing happening with Brighton, the way she treated me tonight was still wrong. Disrespectful. Damn straight it was, Michael agreed. You can stay here as long as you need to figure things out. Paul's phone buzzed for the third time since he'd arrived. Another text from Linda. This is childish and unnecessary. Please come home so we can talk about this like adults. He turned the phone face down without responding. The next morning, Paul called his office and requested a personal day, something he rarely did. His supervisor, Dave, was surprisingly understanding. Paul spent the day helping Michael with a bathroom renovation project, grateful for the physical labor that kept his mind occupied. By evening, his phone showed 8 missed calls from Linda and a dozen texts ranging from angry to pleading. On the second day of his self-imposed exile, Paul decided to go into the office despite it being Saturday. The quiet of the weekend would let him catch up on work and continue avoiding Linda's attempts at contact. Around noon, his concentration was broken by a familiar voice. I thought I might find you here. Paul looked up to see Linda standing by his cubicle, perfectly composed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. How did you know I'd be here? He asked, keeping his voice neutral. You always come to the office when you're upset, she said. It's your safe space. The fact that she knew this detail about him, a detail he hadn't been sure she'd noticed, was both surprising and confusing. What do you want, Linda? I want you to come home, she said directly. This has gone on long enough. Paul glanced around, aware that the few colleagues present were pretending not to listen. Let's talk outside, he suggested, rising and leading the way to the small courtyard behind the building. Once they were alone, Linda crossed her arms defensively. This is ridiculous, Paul. You've made your point. I apologize for not mentioning you in my speech. Now, can we please move past this? Her dismissive tone immediately reignited his anger. This isn't just about the speech. It's about how you treated me the entire night, how you've been treating me for months. I was working, Linda protested. That event was a crucial networking opportunity for me. And I'm what? Just an inconvenient attachment? Something to be hidden away when you're with the important people in your life? Linda had the grace to look slightly ashamed. That's not fair. You know how important this promotion is to me? To us. I needed to present a certain image. And that image doesn't include a husband who's just an accountant? Paul asked quietly. Linda's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Paul said. You know, it's funny. When I was first promoted to senior accountant, the first person I thanked was you, even though you couldn't make it to the office party because you had a client meeting. That's different, Linda said weakly. Why? Because your career matters more than mine? Because your accomplishments are worthy of public recognition while my contributions are just expected? No, because... Linda trailed off, unable to complete the thought without confirming his suspicions. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past 2 days, Paul continued when it became clear she had no response. About balance, about partnership, about what I want from a marriage. And what conclusion have you reached? Linda asked, a defensive edge to her voice. That I deserve to be with someone who's proud to be seen with me, who values my contributions, both public and private, who treats me as an equal partner, not as a support staff member they can dismiss when convenient. Linda's expression softened. I do value you, Paul. I know I haven't shown it lately, but I do. And I'm sorry about the party. I got caught up in the moment in trying to impress Roger and the executive team. And Thomas Brighton? Paul couldn't help adding. Linda stiffened. What about him? Are you sleeping with him? How dare you ask me that? Linda's voice rose in indignation. That's not a no, Paul observed quietly. Of course I'm not sleeping with him. He's a potential client, nothing more. Then why the private dinner at the Westfield? Why the lingering touches? Why did James Harrington's wife give me that look of pity when she found out who I was? Linda's face flushed. Office gossip, nothing more. I want to believe you, Paul said honestly, but right now I don't know what to believe anymore. The Linda I saw at that party wasn't the woman I married. People change, Paul. They evolve. Their priorities shift. And I'm no longer a priority for you. That much is clear. Linda reached for his hand. That's not true. I love you. I'm just adjusting to this new role, to the expectations that come with it. Paul looked down at her hand on his, remembering how she touched Thomas Brighton's arm in almost the same way. Was it all just calculated gestures to her now? I need more time, he said finally, gently withdrawing his hand. This isn't something we can fix with one conversation. Linda's expression hardened. How much time? Because I have a department to run, a major client to secure, and a husband who's apparently too sensitive to understand how corporate politics work. And there it was, the contempt that had been simmering beneath the surface, now bubbling over in her frustration. Thank you, Paul said quietly. For what? For making my decision easier. He rose from the bench. I'll be by next week to pick up more of my things. Please be at work when I come. You're seriously doing this? Linda's voice held disbelief. Throwing away 6 years of marriage because of one bad night? No, Paul corrected her. I'm recognizing that the marriage I thought we had hasn't existed for a long time. And I'm choosing to stop pretending otherwise. He walked away, leaving her staring after him in the courtyard. Over the next week, Paul established a new routine. He stayed at Michael's, commuted to work, and began quietly looking for a new apartment. He also met with a therapist, something he'd never considered before, but now recognized as necessary to process the rapid changes in his life. Linda's messages grew increasingly desperate, culminating in a voicemail that actually made him pause. Paul, please. I miss you. The apartment feels empty without you. I know I messed up, and I know it wasn't just the party. Please come home so we can talk. I'll take a day off work. Hell, I'll take a week off if that's what you need. Just, please don't give up on us without a conversation. After consulting with his therapist, Paul agreed to meet Linda at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between Michael's house and their apartment. She was already there when he arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 cups. She dressed simply, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup, more like the Linda he'd first fallen in love with than the polished executive she'd become. I got your usual, she said as he sat down. Black, 1 sugar. Thanks, he replied, though he didn't immediately drink it. Linda looked tired, dark circles under her eyes partially concealed by makeup. Thank you for meeting me, she began. I know you probably didn't want to. I think we need closure, one way or another, Paul said simply. Linda flinched at the word closure. Is that what this is? That depends on you, Paul replied. I've been doing a lot of thinking this past week, and I've realized something important. I don't want to be in a marriage where I'm an afterthought, where I have to beg for basic respect and acknowledgement. I do respect you, Linda protested. Actions speak louder than word, Paul countered, and your actions lately have shown that you see me as an accessory to your life, not as an equal partner in it. Linda was quiet for a moment, stirring her latte absently. I've been doing some thinking too, she finally said, about why I acted the way I did at the party, about what's been happening to us. And what conclusions did you reach? That I've been scared, she admitted, her voice smaller than he'd heard it in years. Terrified, actually, of not being taken seriously, of being seen as someone who got where she is because of connections or luck rather than hard work and talent. And being seen with me would somehow diminish you? Paul couldn't keep the hurt from his voice. No, well, not exactly. Linda struggled to articulate her thoughts. It's more that I've been trying so hard to project a certain image, confident, independent, entirely self-made. And I was afraid that if I publicly acknowledged how much support I've had from you, it would somehow make my accomplishments seem less mine. So you erased me, Paul said quietly, pretended I didn't exist. Yes, Linda admitted, and it was wrong. So wrong. I see that now. She reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but leaving her own within reach. What I did hurt you deeply, and I'm truly sorry for that. What about Thomas Brighton? He asked directly. Linda didn't flinch from the question. Nothing has happened between us, but, she added before he could speak, I can't honestly say nothing would have happened if things had continued on the path we were on. There was an attraction, an energy. He made me feel powerful, desired, important. And I didn't? The question came out more vulnerable than Paul intended. You made me feel loved, Linda said simply, but somewhere along the way, I started valuing the wrong things. They sat in silence for a moment, both absorbing the weight of her admission. I canceled the dinner with Thomas, Linda continued, and I've requested that Diane handle the Brighton account moving forward. That's a significant step, Paul acknowledged, surprised that she would potentially jeopardize a major client relationship. It's the right thing to do. Linda took a deep breath. I've also spoken with Roger about restructuring my role to reduce the travel and late nights. He was surprisingly supportive, said he'd seen too many executives burn out by sacrificing their personal lives. These all sound like positive changes, Paul said cautiously. They are, Linda agreed, but I know they're not enough on their own to fix what's broken between us. What else are you proposing? Couples counseling for a start, Linda said, and individual therapy for me. I need to understand why I was so willing to risk something real and valuable for the illusion of professional advancement. Paul took a sip of his coffee, considering her words. Words are easy, Linda. Changes are hard. I know, she said, finally reaching across to take his hand. That's why I'm not asking you to come home today. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can change, that we can rebuild what we've lost. What exactly are you suggesting? Time, Linda said. 3 months, during which we both commit to weekly couples counseling and make measurable changes in how we prioritize our relationship. After 3 months, we reassess where we stand. And in the meantime, you continue staying at Michael's or wherever you're comfortable. We have structured time together, date nights, counseling sessions, specific activities. We rebuild from the ground up. And if, after 3 months, one or both of us decides it isn't working, Paul asked, then we move forward with a separation and divorce, Linda said, her voice catching slightly on the word. Knowing we truly tried. Paul considered the proposal. He had expected Linda to demand his immediate return, to minimize the issues between them. This measured, realistic approach suggested she truly understood the damage that had been done. 3 months, he agreed finally, starting with a counseling session this week, if we can get an appointment. Relief flooded Linda's face. Thank you, she said, squeezing his hand. I know I don't deserve this chance, but I promise I won't waste it. Paul finally returned the pressure of her fingers, a small gesture of tentative connection. I should be clear, I'm not promising we'll reconcile. I'm promising to honestly try. That's all I'm asking for, Linda assured him. As they finished their coffee and worked out the logistics of their 3-month plan, Paul felt neither the despair of the past week nor the blind optimism of their early relationship. Instead, he felt something new, the calm certainty of a man who knew his own worth and was no longer willing to accept less than he deserved. Whether their marriage survived or not, he would no longer be invisible. Their first counseling session was uncomfortable but productive. Their therapist, Dr. Bennett, didn't waste time on pleasantries, instead diving straight into the issues that had brought them there. By the end of the session, they had homework. Linda was to write a list of ways Paul's support had enhanced rather than diminished her accomplishments. And Paul was to identify times when he might have downplayed his own needs to prioritize Linda's. Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. Tuesday evenings were for counseling. Friday nights were date nights. No work talk allowed. Sundays were for shared activities, hiking, cooking classes, museum visits, things they'd enjoyed in the early days of their relationship, but had gradually abandoned as Linda's career accelerated. 3 weeks into their trial period, Paul received a surprising email, a job offer from Harrington Consulting, a firm specializing in financial services for nonprofit organizations. The salary was slightly higher than his current position, but more importantly, the work aligned better with his values. When he mentioned it to Linda during their Friday date night, her reaction surprised him. "You should take it," she said immediately. "You've always been interested in nonprofit work." "You remember that?" Paul asked, touched that she'd retained this detail about his professional interests. "Of course I do," Linda replied. "You talked about it when we first met, how you wanted your accounting skills to contribute to something meaningful." 2 months into their separation, Linda was offered a significant promotion, Executive Vice President of Marketing, a position that would mean more responsibility, higher pay, and, crucially, more travel and longer hours. She brought it up during their counseling session, clearly torn. "I wanted to discuss it with you before making any decisions," Linda said. "This affects both of us, not just me." Paul felt a surge of appreciation for this simple acknowledgement, so different from how Linda would have handled the situation just months ago. "I'll only take it if we can find a structure that works for us," Linda said firmly. "No more one-sided decisions." As they neared the end of their 3-month trial period, Paul realized that he was looking forward to their time together rather than dreading it. Linda had made genuine, consistent efforts to change her behavior, not just in grand gestures, but in small daily ways that reflected a fundamental shift in her priorities. For the final date of their trial period, Linda suggested they return to the restaurant where they'd had their first date, a small Italian place with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. "I can't believe they're still in business," Paul remarked as they were seated at a corner table. "I may have been coming here for lunch occasionally," Linda admitted, keeping them afloat single-handedly. They ordered the same meals they'd had on their first date, spaghetti carbonara for her, lasagna for him, and reminisced about the early days of their relationship. "I've been thinking about next steps," Linda said, "about what happens after tonight." "And what have you concluded?" Paul asked, his heart beating a little faster. "That I want to continue rebuilding what we had, or rather, building something better than what we had." Linda met his eyes directly. "I want you to come home, Paul. Not because everything is fixed, but because I believe we can only truly heal this rift by living our daily lives together, practicing the lessons we've learned." Paul considered her words carefully. The past 3 months had shown him that Linda was capable of meaningful change. Not perfect, not complete, but genuine and consistent. "I want to come home too," he said finally, "but with conditions." "Name them," Linda said immediately. "We continue counseling, at least monthly. We maintain our date nights and weekend activities, barring genuine emergencies. And if either of us feels the old patterns returning, we address it immediately, not months down the road." "Agreed," Linda said without hesitation. "And I have one condition of my own." "What's that?" "That you promise to call me out when I'm being self-centered or dismissive. Don't let resentment build up again. I can't fix what I don't know is broken." Paul smiled slightly. "That might be the most significant change of all. You actually wanting to hear when you're wrong." Linda laughed. "Terrifying, isn't it? But necessary." 3 weeks later, they attended a charity event where Linda was representing Crestview. Unlike the promotion party that had sparked their crisis, this time Linda kept Paul close by her side, introducing him to colleagues and clients with obvious pride. "This is my husband, Paul," she would say. "He's just taken a position with Harrington Consulting, specializing in financial services for nonprofits." Paul noticed how she emphasized his work, ensuring that he was seen as a professional in his own right, not just as Linda's husband. It was a small but significant change that reflected her new understanding of true partnership. As the evening wound down, Linda was asked to say a few words on behalf of Crestview, one of the event's major sponsors. She stepped to the microphone with the same confidence she'd always shown, but when she began speaking, Paul noticed a difference in her approach. "Community has always been at the heart of Crestview's mission," she began, "and I've learned recently that community begins at home, with the people who support us day in and day out." Her eyes found Paul in the crowd, and she smiled directly at him before continuing. "My husband, Paul, taught me that lesson, that our greatest accomplishments are never truly solo endeavors, but rather the product of the love, support, and partnership we receive from those around us. As applause filled the room, Paul felt a warmth spread through his chest. Not because Linda had publicly acknowledged him, but because he knew she truly meant it. The words weren't just for show, they reflected a genuine shift in how she viewed their relationship. The charity event had been far more enjoyable than the promotion party, and not just because Linda had acknowledged him. Something else had changed too. On Monday, Linda was scheduled to meet with Thomas Brighton to discuss the marketing campaign she and Diane had developed for his company. How would that interaction go now that Linda had set clearer professional boundaries? Paul was curious but no longer worried. He'd seen enough over the past 3 months to trust that Linda was genuinely committed to their marriage. As they pulled into their driveway, Linda's phone buzzed with an email. Her expression tightened slightly as she read it. "What is it?" Paul asked. "Brighton. He wants to have dinner instead of meeting at the office," she said, looking up at Paul with a mix of emotions. "Says he prefers a more relaxed atmosphere for creative discussions." "And what are you going to tell him?" Linda's thumb hovered over her phone's keyboard for a moment. Then she typed quickly and hit send. "I told him I'm only available for office meetings during business hours," she said, "and that I'll be bringing Diane along since she's managing his account now." Paul felt a surge of pride at her response, not because she needed his approval, but because she was upholding her own integrity. Brighton's response might affect that 7-figure account, he observed. "Maybe," Linda shrugged, "but some things are more important than landing an account."